There is a very specific moment in the financial lives of most Americans that almost nobody talks about honestly. It is not when you get your first job. It is not when you pay off your student loans. It is not when you buy a house or max out your 401k or finally start investing. It is when your account crosses $20,000 and stays there. Not touches it, stays there. Because before that number, you are doing everything yourself. Every dollar in your account got there because you physically traded your time for it. You woke up, you showed up, you worked, and at the end of the week, a number in your account went up slightly. After that number, something quietly shifts. And most people never notice the shift because they were never told it was coming. The financial industry does not have great incentives to explain this to you clearly. Banks make money when you stay confused. Brokerages make money when you stay afraid. Credit card companies make money when you stay broke. So let us just talk about it plainly. Here is the part nobody wants to say out loud. The first $20,000 is not just the hardest. It is disproportionately harder than every other $20,000 you will ever accumulate. Not a little harder. Structurally, mechanically, mathematically harder in a way that has nothing to do with your discipline or your mindset or how badly you want it. And understanding why requires understanding one number. 7%. 7% is the approximate historical average annual return of the American stock market, adjusted for inflation, over the past century. Some years it is more. Some years it is catastrophically less. But averaged out across decades, that is roughly the number. Now watch what 7% does depending on how much money you start with. If you have $1,000 invested, 7% gives you $70 at the end of the year. $70. That is 2 tanks of gas. That is a dinner out. That is almost nothing. If you have $10,000 invested, 7% gives you $700. Getting closer. But still, $700 is not changing anyone's life. If you have $20,000 invested, 7% gives you $1,400. Now it is starting to feel real. If you have $100,000 invested, 7% gives you $7,000. That is more than many Americans have in their entire savings account, generated passively in a single year. If you have $500,000 invested, 7% gives you $35,000 a year, automatically, without working a single extra hour. Notice what just happened. The percentage never changed. 7% was always 7%. What changed was the base. And that base, building that base, that is the entire game. The problem is that for most people, it takes years just to get to $20,000. And during those years, the market is generating returns so small they feel invisible. So people give up. They tell themselves it is not working. They pull the money out for something urgent. They start over, and then they start over again. Here is where it gets darker. It is not just that the math is discouraging in the early stages. It is that the psychology of building wealth is specifically calibrated to break you before you reach the threshold where the math starts working in your favor. Think about the timeline for a second. The average American household brings home somewhere around $55,000 to $60,000 a year after taxes. After rent, after food, after transportation, after all the basic costs of existing in this country in 2025, the average American saves somewhere between 3 and 5% of their income. That is roughly $2,000 to $3,000 per year. At that savings rate, reaching $20,000 takes between 7 and 10 years. 7 to 10 years of discipline. 7 to 10 years of delayed gratification. 7 to 10 years of watching the number grow so slowly that some months it feels like it is not growing at all. And here is the cruel part. During those 7 to 10 years, the emotional return on your sacrifice is almost zero. You are not getting rich. You are not financially free. You are not even close. You are just slowly, quietly, invisibly building a base that will not start paying you back meaningfully for another decade after that. The human brain was not designed for this kind of delayed feedback loop. We are wired for immediate consequences. Hunt, eat, survive. The idea of sacrificing today for a payoff in 17 years is genuinely unnatural to how we process reward and motivation. And the financial industry knows this, which is why the entire consumer economy is built to intercept your money before it gets to that threshold. New car payment. Credit card with a reasonable minimum. Buy now, pay later on, something you probably did not need. A subscription you forgot you signed up for. A lifestyle upgrade that felt justified because you got a raise. Every one of these is a mechanism that keeps you below the threshold. Not through malice, just through the ordinary, relentless pressure of modern American economic life. Let us talk about what actually happens when you cross $20,000. Not emotionally, mechanically. The first change is behavioral. Studies on saving psychology consistently find that once people cross a meaningful threshold in their accounts, they are significantly less likely to drain it. There is something about seeing a number with 5 digits that changes how people relate to their money. It stops feeling like emergency funds that could disappear in one bad month. It starts feeling like something worth protecting. The second change is mathematical, and this is the one that matters more. At $20,000 invested at 7%, you are generating roughly $115 per month without doing anything. That is not life-changing, but it is enough to cover a utility bill, enough to offset one monthly expense, enough to slightly reduce the pressure that causes most people to raid their savings in the first place. More importantly, it means your money is now growing faster than your contributions. For most people below $20,000, every new dollar in their account came from their own labor. They earned it, saved it, deposited it. The market was contributing almost nothing by comparison. At $20,000, the math starts to flip, slowly at first, then faster. At $50,000, the market is contributing roughly $3,500 a year. At that point, the market is doing the equivalent of a part-time job for you. You are getting paid for owning something rather than just for doing something. At $100,000, the number that most personal finance people call the real inflection point, the market is contributing roughly $7,000 a year. That is $33 a day, every day, whether you work or not. The journey from 0 to 20,000 is the hardest stretch because you are doing all the lifting yourself. You are pushing a boulder up a hill with no mechanical advantage. The journey from 20,000 to 100,000 is still hard, but now the boulder has a small engine on it. The journey from 100,000 to 500,000, the engine gets bigger every year. This is compound interest. You have heard the phrase 1,000 times, but most explanations skip the uncomfortable part, which is that compound interest is almost completely useless until you have enough base capital for the compounding to produce numbers that feel real to a human being. Albert Einstein supposedly called compound interest the eighth wonder of the world. What he allegedly failed to mention is that it takes about a decade to figure out why. Let us run some numbers that the financial media does not spend much time on. The average age of a first-time investor in America is around 29 years old. By the time most Americans start investing with any consistency, they have already lost roughly a decade of compounding. A 22-year-old who invests $5,000 a year and earns 7% annually will have, by age 65, somewhere in the range of $1.4 million. A 32-year-old who does the exact same thing, same discipline, same returns, will have somewhere around $680,000. Same behavior, same percentage. 10 years of delay cuts the outcome roughly in half. That is not a personal failure. That is just the math. But it means that the cost of not understanding this system early is not measured in thousands of dollars. It is measured in hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now here is where the class dynamic becomes impossible to ignore. The reason most people do not start investing at 22 is not because they are irresponsible. It is because at 22, they do not have the margin to invest. They are paying off student loans. They are in an entry-level job that does not cover rent in a major city. They have no emergency fund, which means any investment they make is one broken transmission away from being liquidated. Building the first $20,000 requires a level of financial stability that a significant portion of Americans simply do not have access to at the age when it would make the most difference. The people who start investing early are disproportionately people whose families already had money. Not because they are smarter or more disciplined. Because starting early requires not being in survival mode, and not being in survival mode requires a cushion that was usually provided by someone else before them. This is not a political argument, it is just a description of how the system works. And understanding how it works is the first step toward navigating it on your own terms. Now let us talk about the lie that surrounds all of this. The financial content industry, which is enormous and growing, has a strong incentive to make you believe two contradictory things simultaneously. First, that building wealth is simple and anyone can do it if they just follow a few straightforward steps. Second, that building wealth is complicated enough to require constant guidance, premium courses, affiliate-linked brokerage accounts, and a steady diet of content telling you what to do next. The truth is messier than either of those. Yes, the underlying mechanism of wealth accumulation is genuinely straightforward. Spend less than you earn. Invest the difference consistently. Give it time. That is actually it. But the conditions required to do that consistently, over decades, while living a real human life with real emergencies and real opportunities and real psychological pressures, those conditions are not simple at all. The financial influencer space in particular has developed a very specific genre of content that could be described as aspirational math. You watch someone explain that if you invest $400 a month starting at age 25, you will retire with $1.2 million. The math is correct. The implication that this is therefore easy and straightforward and just a matter of deciding to do it is where the honesty ends. $400 a month is $4,800 a year. After taxes, at the median American income, that is roughly 8 to 9% of take-home pay. That is before rent, food, healthcare, transportation, childcare, or any of the other costs that make up the actual texture of American financial life. The math works. The life does not always cooperate with the math. And the first $20,000 is where that tension is most acute, most discouraging, and most likely to cause someone to give up entirely. There is a larger thing happening here that is worth naming. The American economy is, in certain very specific ways, structured to reward people who already have capital and make it disproportionately difficult to accumulate the initial capital required to access those rewards. Capital gains taxes are lower than income taxes, meaning money that works for you is taxed at a lower rate than work you do yourself. The more you have invested, the more you benefit from this structure. Retirement accounts like 401k plans and IRAs are excellent vehicles for wealth building, but they require taxable income to contribute to, which means the unemployed, the underemployed, and those working in the informal economy cannot access the same tax advantages as salaried workers. Credit scores, which determine the interest rates you pay on everything from mortgages to car loans, are built through a history of borrowing, meaning people without a history of borrowing cannot access the low interest rates that would allow them to borrow cheaply for investments. They are charged more to borrow because they have borrowed less, which makes it harder to build the capital that would reduce their need to borrow. Every one of these systems is logical in isolation. Together, they create a consistent pattern. Getting to $20,000 is hard, partly because the economic structure that surrounds you was not designed with your initial accumulation in mind. None of this means the system cannot be navigated. Clearly, it can be. But navigating it successfully requires understanding that you are not just managing your personal budget. You are interacting with a set of institutional structures that have their own logic and their own momentum. Here is what most people who have crossed that threshold describe when they are being honest about it. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no day when you wake up and feel rich. The shift is quieter than that. It is the first time you check your account and realize the market went up and you made more in a single day than you made working. Not much more. It is the first time you have an unexpected expense and you realize you can handle it without wiping out your savings. The buffer is real now. It has weight. It is the first time you start thinking about money differently, not as something to frantically accumulate before it disappears, as something that has a momentum of its own, something that is, on some small but real level, working without you. That psychological shift is worth more than the actual dollars. Because once you understand the mechanism viscerally, not just theoretically, the behavior required to maintain it becomes much easier to sustain. The first $20,000 is not just a financial milestone. It is the proof of concept. It is the evidence, gathered through your own experience, that the system actually works the way they said it would. Before that, you are investing on faith. After that, you are investing on evidence. Here is the question worth sitting with. If the first $20,000 is the hardest, and if the people who cross it earliest have the largest advantage, and if the structural conditions of American economic life make crossing it significantly harder for some people than others, then what does that mean for the roughly 60% of Americans who have less than $1,000 in savings right now? Not in terms of what they should do. The steps are simple enough. Earn more than you spend. Invest the difference. Leave it alone for a very long time. But in terms of what it means for the shape of wealth in this country going forward, the stock market has returned extraordinary gains over the past 15 years. That wealth went primarily to people who had capital to invest in 2009, 2010, 2011, when everything was cheap and the recovery was just beginning. The people who had capital then were disproportionately the people who already had capital before the crash. The next cycle will likely follow the same logic. There will be a moment, probably one that does not announce itself clearly, when the math will be as favorable as it has ever been. When the first $20,000 will generate the best returns of any $20,000 in the next several decades. If this changed how you think about money, even slightly, send it to someone who is still below that threshold. Not to lecture them, just because nobody sent it to you when it would have mattered most. And if you have a thought about where the next opportunity is, or whether the system can actually be navigated the way I described, leave it below. The most interesting arguments tend to happen in the comments on videos like this one. We put something out every week. If you want to be there when it drops, you know what to do.